Nimrod, the king of Babel. What kind of a man was he? And what secrets do we know?
Hi and welcome to Ultimate Explorer. I'm Lisa Ling. Tonight we're going back to war-torn Baghdad to investigate the whereabouts of one of the world's greatest lost treasures. It's called the Treasure of Nimrod, almost 175 pounds of ancient gold jewelry and artifacts over 2,500 years old. These remarkable jewels were put on display for a brief period of time more than 10 years ago, but have been missing from public sight ever since. Just how important are they? Well, their original discovery was considered one of the most significant archaeological finds since the discovery of King Tut's tomb nearly a century ago. Now their very existence is in doubt. Were they casualties of war destroyed by the bombing of Baghdad, or had they been spirited away by Saddam and his henchmen?
King Nimrod, the builder of the Tower of Babel. The mystery of King Nimrod, even who he was, a black man, a white man, a god. We don't know. We do know he was the king of Babel. A wealthy king with gold and many treasures. Rubies, gemstones, anything what you can think of, what a man can make him rich.
And Cush begot Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one in the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. In the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, and Erech, and Akkad, and Calneh, in the land of Shinar. Who was Nimrod? Interestingly, Nimrod was the ruler of the world after the flood, and was known to have led the construction of the Tower of Babel. When was the tower constructed? The Tower of Babel was said to have been constructed 101 years after the flood. Nimrod was the son of Cush, who was the son of Ham, Noah's son. Likely because the Tower of Babel was built somewhere around 101 years after the flood, this would place Nimrod's birth at least 70 years after the flood. Nimrod was known as a mighty hunter before the Lord. Many state that this title was a compliment to Nimrod, but other sources would prove otherwise. At the price of the victim, a hunter pleases himself, unlike a shepherd whom helps the ones who he cares for. Jesus was known as a shepherd over his flock. The one to be a mighty hunter in the days of Nimrod must have had great strength in war, unlike other men, so he was known to be as a sinner before the Lord. What is Nimrod's connection to giants? Besides the fact that Nimrod is the son of Cush, who is the son of Ham, who is cursed with the Nephilim pollution inside of his blood, there is another connection that ties Nimrod to the Nephilim, other than his blood lineage. The name Nimrod was known to be Akkadian, which originates from Akkad, A-C-C-A-D. Akkad, A-C-C-A-D, was an ancient city founded by Nimrod. He is connected to the Akkadians, which is A-K-K-A-D, not only by the name, but by gods. The Akkadian god of war and hunting was Ninurta, who was also called the Arrow and a mighty hero. Ancient legends state that Nimrod was originally man, but then somehow changed into a giant. They don't say how, but the fact remains that Nimrod was somehow connected to giants. With Nephilim technology, it would make sense how he would have been able to possibly change his blood to Nephilim. With Ham's pollution already inside him, Nimrod already had the Nephilim genes. Now he just needed to find a way to transform his entire body into a Nephilim. And somehow he found a way. Genesis 10:8 states, "And Cush fathered Nimrod, he began to be a mighty one in the earth. The word in, just like in Genesis 6:4 when it says, there were giants in the earth in those days, is very interesting, because the word in is used to describe Nimrod's rulership of the earth. Why not use the word on to describe Nimrod's rule? In this passage, the Tower of Babel had not yet been constructed, so it is known that this passage is not speaking of Nimrod's reign on earth, but underground. As we learned before, the Nephilim had underground cities, in which the Book of Enoch describes Og of Bashan, one of the Nephilim, surviving through the flood. Why would the Nephilim be so focused on creating underground cities? After this passage, it goes on to say how Nimrod was a mighty hunter before the Lord, or a sinner before the Lord. The Watchers were the fathers of the Nephilim, and it is a well-known idea that it was rather the Watchers ruling underground, and the giants were ruling up on earth. This still creates the next question of, why would the Watchers build underground cities? To answer this question, we must look at the history of the fallen angels. In the rebellion, Lucifer fell along with other angels in a great catastrophe, and all but Satan were sent to the abyss. Later in the 6th generation, the Watchers lusted after human women and fell from heaven down to Mount Hermon, where they would reproduce and create the first immortal Nephilim. Where is the abyss? To answer that, we must look in the book of Matthew. In Matthew 12, verse 40, it says, "For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth." Where is the heart of the earth? As one would expect, the heart of the earth is in the center of the earth. This passage speaks of Jesus' death and how he went to the abyss to defeat the fallen angels that once betrayed him. Hence the defeat of death. The Bible talks about the abyss being a bottomless pit. This would place the abyss in the very deep, dark part of the earth. The angels of the rebellion were exiled to the abyss, possibly the heavenly abyss, to wait their releasing. Jesus went to the abyss and conquered the fallen angels for 3 days, then rose up to heaven. Why would Jesus go to the abyss? Jesus went there because he needed to show his power by defeating the ones who betrayed him thousands of years ago, to state the importance of his salvation. The question still remains though, why did the Nephilim and Watchers build underground cities? From what we learned about Nephilim technology, it was known that they had extreme involvement with extra-dimensional travel. The evil Nephilim kings, the worst of them, are trapped in the abyss. With these harsh conditions, that would make it hard for the Nephilim to be released from the abyss. So the only way out is through some kind of portal. No one knows the real reason the Nephilim made underground cities, but one might speculate that it would somehow make it easier to create portals for the other Nephilim in the abyss. The Nephilim also were known to have made great machines that gave them the ability to travel throughout the cosmos, where the heavenly abyss and the fallen angels hang. In Revelation, it speaks of the stars falling from the sky. Could these be fallen angels fallen upon the earth in the last days? It is possible, and highly likely, that the stars would be the fallen angels and that they would have something to do with the alien phenomena. What does Nimrod have to do with this? And Cush fathered Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one in the earth. Nimrod ruled in the earth as well as on the earth too. He was known as a Gibberim, which was basically giants or evil human beings that were known as mighty men or men of renown, and that perfectly describes Nimrod. Nimrod was indeed a giant of some sort, but he could not have been a Nephilim unless Cush was so. This would place Nimrod to be a Gibberim, not Nephilim. The building of the Tower of Babel came into play, and every human was forced to take part into this building. It is said that the Tower of Babel was built because they wanted to reach the heavens. They must have surely known that was impossible, and not anything was to waste their time upon. Others say it was constructed because Nimrod was humanist and wanted to become godlike to show his own glory. The Tower of Babel was not just some tall tower. It was a stargate, and Nimrod was trying to reach the firmament, which was a vaulted dome that God had placed over the earth spoken of in Genesis, chapter 1, where he would enter heaven. As ancient texts state, Nimrod's goal was to enter heaven and slay God. The whole land of Shinar was under one language, and there seemed to be a religion of humanism that everyone centered around. This was not just an empire, but a new world order. Hermes, who we connected as Enoch the Evil, was known to have been given divine powers. From what we know, Enoch had relations with the Nephilim and possibly polluted his blood into a giant, just like Nimrod years later after the flood. The antediluvian Enoch was also known to be Hermes, who appeared yet again around the time of Babel. He had the same powers and taught the same Enochian mysticism that was produced years before in the antediluvian age. Yet again, he was forcing it upon the people of the plain in Shinar. Enoch, with his powers, in this scenario, would be reckoned as the false prophet, and Nimrod being the Antichrist. These were the two main figures in the post-flood world, and were parallel to the end-time description described in the book of Revelation. God had just sent a flood upon the earth to wipe out the Nephilim power, and now they had returned with Nimrod, creating the same issue that troubled God before. God destroyed the Tower of Babel, and then dispersed the languages of humanity. Nimrod was known to have lived about 500 years. In the book of Yashar, chapter 27, it tells of Esau going out to hunt, and found Nimrod with 2 other men, which were mighty men. And he describes Nimrod's people. It goes on to say that Esau killed the 3 of them with his sword and fled because he heard the sound of Nimrod's people coming. Nimrod died a violent death that day at the hands of Esau. Nimrod was a giant, but remember, he was originally human, so he had a human soul. Unlike the other Nephilim being banished to remain on earth as demons, Nimrod was possibly cast into the abyss, waiting the end times.
In Mesopotamia, after the Great Flood, some accounts suggest it reached nearly 30 stories, or 300 feet tall. It was described as a bridge between heaven and earth, built by a unified people.
Someone got the idea of building a tower to heaven, to make a name for ourselves. Well, this starts to become hubris, where you start challenging the gods. This is a key idea, a certain kind of arrogance that is starting to think that you are a god. And so, as the tower lifts up, God is annoyed.
When you look at the story of the Tower of Babel, it's essentially a story of mankind developing technology and being like the gods, being like our extraterrestrial creators. And therefore, mankind was, in a sense, kept from reaching a technological level.
The word Babel means gate to God. And some believe that the gate to God was, in fact, a stargate, a ladder, tower, or stairway that reached into the heavens. And so when God saw that humankind were building a stargate, this was too much.
Well, what happened next? Powers that be watched. They observed. They spoke to one another, saying, "We have to descend to the earth to bring an assault upon the builders of the tower." What kind of an assault? The biblical text is very clear. They touched the minds of the people and corrupted their spirit of unity.
The Tower of Babel story really relates to a decision that these so-called gods had made. Human beings were not only supposed to speak different languages, they were also supposed to fight with each other. They were supposed to come into conflict with each other. And as long as they're squabbling with each other, they're not going to unite and fight against you.
I believe whoever got involved realized these human beings are coming on pretty darn fast. We had to slow this down a little bit, and that's what they did.